This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. We're here at CBC, which was in person this year. I'm super excited to actually be here and see everybody. Sitting across from me is Shaun Berns from Phase 3 Brewing. Welcome to the podcast, Shaun.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to be out and about.
It's a conversation that we've wanted to have for a little bit of time, and it was just great that you were here and we could do this. Coming off of our stout issue, 2021 stout issue, you had some fantastic scores in there, a 95 and a 98 for two of your barrel-aged beers. You've won numerous awards at the Festival of Barrel-Aged Beers in Chicago. Certainly have made a name for Phase 3 and also the past kind of brewing places that you've worked before that. We're going to kind of walk through that history,
sure.
How you got to where you are and why you make the beers the way that you do, that are so impactful and interesting in this kind of barrel-aged space.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be a good barrel-aged episode of the podcast. But before we do that, like your flagship beer, you can rely on G&D chillers for the same quality and consistency. G&D guarantees that every chiller they build will hit 28 degrees without breaking a sweat. They never stop. They draft, they craft, they service each and every brewery, big or small, all in an effort to build one hell of a chiller. For nearly 30 years, G&D has been committed to cold. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com. This episode is also brought to you by BSG Hop Solutions. Meet the latest in the BSG Hop Solutions portfolio, Sativa. Strong expressions of stone fruit, floral, and resinous pine flavors and aromas define this blend, crafted specifically for use in hazy IPAs and other hop-forward beers. Sativa is ideal for aroma, whirlpool, and dry hop additions to hazy and juicy IPAs or for any other hoppy styles where a combination of citrus, tropical fruit, and pine aromatics are desired. Go to bsgcraftbrewing.com to learn more or call 1-800-374-2739. So, Shaun, we normally kick off the podcast with a little bit about your history. Talk to me about your arc through brewing and that kind of path you took professionally. First on a personal passion level, and then pursuing it professionally.
Yeah, try to keep it short here for you. I don't want to get too crazy, but my career kind of started, I think, a lot like most professional brewers. In the garage, doing small 5-gallon batches,
sure,
that kind of thing. And at that time, I was working at a chain brew pub, as nothing to do with the brewery, all front of house stuff, and kind of, got into beer and decided to start helping in the back. So I started helping, clean kegs, polish tanks, grain out, all the stuff the brewer didn't want to do.
Sure.
So kind of got my feet wet, and I managed to actually enjoy that aspect of it too. It was just a cool seeing it from that angle. Eventually I ended up pursuing a degree in it. So I went to Siebel in Chicago and graduated, and then ended up getting a full-time position at that chain. Worked my way from assistant to head brewer and eventually to regional brewer, and then left there. But during the last year and a half that I was there, the haze craze was kind of starting when it was, back when it was new. And I noticed that and started kind of pursuing that and wanted to bring that to the Chicago market. And at that time, there's only maybe one or two other breweries that were even kind of starting to do it. I started doing it there, and it worked out really well. I was pretty proud of myself. The first batch actually turned out pretty well, so it was a good start. And then that kind of coincided with a stout release that we had done a few months previous to that, and that kind of started, which most brew pubs don't tend to package a lot, at least back then.
Sure.
So this was all new, and it was kind of like, how do we get this fire going here at the brew pub? And I'm like, well, people are buying packaged beer. People want, especially in Chicago with stouts and Bourbon County and stuff. So people are just like, that was kind of my like, hey, if we want people to get re-engaged with this brand, we need to offer them some packaged like stouts and stuff.
Also, but a weird move for a kind of larger chain,
Very.
brew pub chain, to try to get into even brewing that kind of style, or thinking that people would care that much about it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it was absolutely weird. It was like the first time that was really happening. And that, you know, they had 30 something locations. So
yeah, I remember hearing about those beers, like that one location with that, you know, right.
Yeah, it was very, very strange. There was a lot of eyebrows raised at that time when anytime someone heard about it. But yeah, I mean, that took off. So I had a small little space where I started working with, I think 4 barrels were the first time I ever filled. And yeah, we released that. Took I think like 3 weeks to sell out of the tickets for that. But the little, we kind of made a day out of it, and it actually turned out really cool. We did a variant called Cocoa Chaos was the name of it, and it was a barrel aged stout aged on cocoa nibs, kind of where I first started using those. But that was the kind of the star of the show that day, and that kind of led into a series of beers after that kind of focused around cocoa nibs also. And then we did one more release, but either way, kind of throughout this like years, just kind of making a pretty big impact in the Chicago market, and a lot of people kind of looking our way, which was really cool to see. So that kind of caught the attention of some guys down in a suburb 30 minutes south of where I was at there. And we started, they asked me if, I'd start up their brewery with them as their head brewer at the time. And I did that for about a year and a half, and just kind of, I mean, everything kind of just was crazy. Like you mentioned, there was some FOBAB medals won during that time, some long lines.
There were some Chicago news helicopters circling over lines of 700 or 800 people at a time. A little bit of, you started off with people wanting what you did very quickly like that. Yeah,
absolutely. And it honestly, looking back, it's a little bit of a blur. Things were just moving so fast, and but it was really, really, really fun. We did that
we did a breakout brewer story that brewery, More Brewing, back when you were there, and of course that things continued, and then you decided to break out and do it yourself.
So in March of 2019, the general manager, who happens to be my best friend, him and I and my wife kind of decided, like, we're kind of busting our butts over here, and we'd like to kind of try it on our own, see if we can do it. We kind of walked them into a good spot. They expanded and stuff. So we felt good, kind of just like, all right, let's go do this on our own. And so, in March of 2019, we started phase 3. So hopefully we can put that together. That we got phase 1, the first brew pub, and then more phase 2, and then phase 3.
It's pretty cheeky right there.
Pretty cheeky. That's kind of where that came from. And so, we started contract brewing out of a smaller brewery that was up in Lake Zurich, Illinois. But it was basically turnkey. It was like ready to go. We were able to walk in and start brewing. Not any real downtime for us. So that made it really ideal. And third batch of beer, I think we brewed. No, it was the 5th and 6th batch of beer that we brewed was a stout. So it was like we knew where we were going. We knew where we needed to take it.
It was going into tanks quickly because you needed to let it age. So it had to be the thing.
Exactly. So we got going right away. Mostly focusing on hazies and stuff, but always kind of, I guess at phase 3 too, though, trying to hold the roots of that phase 1, where we're doing pub ales and stuff like that. Whether it be a lager or more of an actual traditional like pub ale. But we've done some throwbacks that kind of are similar recipes to stuff we were doing back then that we just enjoyed drinking, got us into beer. So we always kind of hold our ground there.
So you went from contract brewing, but you now own the brewery, right?
We do, yeah. It's kind of a complicated story, but to keep the story short, in January of 2020, so shortly before the pandemic started, we purchased all the equipment. Which was mutually beneficial for both parties there, which was nice. But we ended up purchasing all the equipment and assumed the lease shortly after, and kind of just took over on that front. Then And then actually just this year, we ended up purchasing the building that we were in, and then in addition to some other units adjacent to kind of expand and grow, kind of settle in a little bit. But
sure.
Yeah, it's been
a little more control of your destiny then.
Absolutely, yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And then of course, you also, and I should have mentioned this at the top, you launched a whole hard seltzer side brand too, called Lulz.
Of course, right?
Yeah, we should just talk about hard seltzer the entire episode.
No, we were watching, and it was something we weren't really sure where that was going to go. We obviously saw the big guys doing it, and those were working really well, but they have very nice equipment and filtration setups that we just didn't have, being that we weren't into seltzer. But we saw some other cool ideas I thought that were out there that were very similar to stuff we were doing, the heavily fruited stuff. Sure. So it was like, well, I think we could do that, like that wouldn't require the filtration type setups that, these perfectly clear.
You're already making these heavily fruited American sour beers.
Exactly.
And so it's just a little different base that you don't have to spend as much time lacto acidifying.
100%. So we saw the writing on the wall there. It was like, yep, like we can jump into this. And we did, and spun that off as a little bit of a different brand. Obviously, just being that it's seltzer, we wanted to play with it a little different. A little bit of a breath of fresh air too when we're working on projects for that specific brand or for the seltzers and stuff, and kind of get out of the phase 3 mentality when we're doing stuff like that. But yeah, that worked out, and then we started a pink lemonade one over the summer, and that's been doing wonderful for us. People seem to really like that, and yeah, it's just seltzer.
all the hip things these days.
Seriously.
Sure. Well, we're going to talk about brewing some stouts. I think that's, like you said, it's an early focus. It's something that your local Chicago market, and of course the more broader national trading market, for that matter, of beer geeks have always been interested in, or have been interested since you started making them. And I've certainly have staked a reputation on that. So we're going to dive in and talk a little bit about how you brew those. But first, a brewery might have 99 problems, but your fruit supplier shouldn't be one. Old Orchard is already known for their quality concentrates, but they also pride themselves on consistent product and reliable supply. When brewers need assistance, Old Orchard is just an email, phone call, and even a text away. Based in Greater Grand Rapids, Michigan, better known as Beer City, USA, Old Orchard is core to the brewing community. To join their fruit family, learn more at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, are you ready to brew like a pro? ProBrew has the equipment, systems, and technology to take your brewery production to the next level. Check out www.probrew.com for ProCarb inline carbonation technology, ProFill rotary filling and seaming can fillers, the Alchemator inline alcohol separation system, 7 to 50 barrel brew houses, and more. ProBrew offers the craft beer industry innovative solutions to help you brew like a pro. Go to www.probrew.com for more info. So where did the stout thing come from? What was it that just said, hey, I think I can make these, and I think I can, find a way to make these in a compelling way that will, make our mark. I mean, you were in a crowded market in Chicago. Bourbon County set the tone. They're pioneers in that kind of field.
Yep.
They brew some fantastic beers, corporate ownership aside, the actual beers and the liquid in the bottle and the glass, like they're fantastically well-made beers. Yep. And certainly in the Midwest in general, there is a pretty strong scene around barrel aging. And of course, people from that Goose Island program are now working all over the place. We kind of, map that sphere of influence, and you can see it everywhere from Ozark, in Arkansas to Eric Ponce at Firestone, like all these alumni. I mean, it's just like, you've got a lot of talented people out there around the country who've, been focused on making beers this way. So what pushed you to go into that realm, and how did you decide, or how did you start to kind of formulate what your beers were going to be?
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, you hit it pretty much on the head as far as location goes. Chicago's just, I mean, people love their barrel-aged stouts in Chicago. They do. Bourbon County set the tone, like you said.
They love things they can trade in general, but they really, they love drinking those too.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, having such a high standard barrel-aged stout like that right in your backyard, you're kind of like, you can't make anything less than this. Like this, the bar has been set. Like it has to be as good or better as this beer. So definitely went into it knowing that, having that mentality and knowing that it needed to kind of wow people right off the bat. But yeah, it took a lot of influence from Bourbon County back in the day, back at phase 1, you know. Definitely had a lot of influence. I'd say the recipes changed so much over the years that there's probably very little at this point that really is reminiscent of those recipes back then.
Yeah, I mean, even over the last 6 or 7 years, like trends in barrel aged stout, they've definitely shifted.
They definitely have, and again, but I think again going back to the location is just, you know, in the Midwest there's just, you know, 3 powerhouse breweries, you know, 2 being in Missouri and then Iowa, and just absolutely crushing the stout game. So it's just again being influenced by them and taking an approach that kind of models some of the drinkability, I think, too, of those beers. Mainly, I would say, as far as like viscosity and thickness, and kind of the intense barrel character, the 2+ year age blends and stuff like that.
Right.
So that's something that we actually just are getting to right now. Where we're finally at like the length, but as far as like viscosity, I've kind of always been able to have to work around that or with that as kind of my main weapon, my main tool, I guess, in the bag. But
and it's interesting again as things are moving and shifting. On the terms of base beer side, you have to be thinking 2 years ahead. You know, that of where things might go. You know, because there's that kind of time. You know, it's not quite that bourbon where we're gonna throw it in barrels and need to know what the demand is going to be 10 years from now. Yeah, but you still do need to have some idea of what people are going to be interested in.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that. We've actually been kind of doing some of that right now. That some of the guesswork, I guess, of kind of right now. It's been all about thick, sweet stouts and stuff. I'd say for the last 2-3 years. But we've seen some people kind of coming out of the woodwork asking for like, you know, the little bit lower gravity, the little bit more barrel focused, not quite as thick and sweet. So we're kind of finding balance there, but we've definitely filled enough barrels at this point where now we feel safer going back down gravity just a little bit to for blending purposes, but we'll kind of have enough in stock to kind of play however the market kind of needs us to play. So
it's interesting. What do you look? I mean, I'm curious. Like, what are those barometers there? I mean, you know, is it anecdotal customer asks? Are they untapped reviews? Is it, you know, where do you know? It's hard. Again, you're trying to forecast, but you also don't. You know, figuring out what's the signal, what's the noise, can be hard from a brewery perspective.
It absolutely is hard. I think any information that I get is something that I'll use. Untapped is obviously the most apparent kind of immediate thing that I can use. But you know, Facebook messages or just chitter chatter in Facebook groups and stuff, and kind of stuff like that is really where I'm looking. And quite frankly, I trust my palate too. So I kind of lean on myself a lot, and I just kind of I think I have a good instinct when it comes to those things. So it's just kind of, I don't know if that means I'm an average beer consumer. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Just means you're in touch.
Yeah, I'm in touch. So I definitely think I'm aware, and I think I make pretty good judgment calls on that front. But I definitely take feedback from people too.
And I think you're right. Like we start to, you know, we're tasting different things all the time, and you find your own palate like intrigued by these other things now. And right, sometimes I think that leads from where that consumer thing, consumer palate ends up. But a lot of times, the rest catch up. But let's talk about, constructing
composition,
constructing, stouts. Where, as you're thinking about it, how, designing recipes, where do you start?
So what's funny is actually a lot of people that I've done collaborations with and stuff, and kind of the first thing is, where do you start? What base malt do we want to start with? And I was kind of chuckle a little bit in my head, but I make it knowing that it's a little bit funny to me, but I always just go like, Matt, like it doesn't matter to me. Like as far like we can use Pilsner malt, we can use Maris Otter malt. I don't have a specific
That's
one.
Not where the magic happens.
Yeah, I really don't think that on like a 35 plus Plato stout that you're gonna taste the difference between Pilsner and Maris Otter. Maybe maybe someone could argue with me, and if you got two side by side, I'd love to try to see if there really is a difference. But over the years, I've brewed with just about every normal base malt, from Maris Otter to Scott malt to Pilsner or whatever, and I've just never noticed a big difference between one or the other. So I think the secret sauce is more in the specialty malts and stuff, and some other factors like viscosity or gravity and stuff like that.
Yeah. So how does that process work then? You're thinking about barrel aging. Do you work from multiple recipes to kind of build blends? Do you think, hey, this batch I want to try to do this with this kind of adjunct ingredient in it, and so I want to try to shift a base beer this way? I mean, given that it's going into barrels, it's going to sit there for 12 to 24 months, maybe more. There's a like how does that envisioning process work, or do you have multiple kind of modes of operation around that?
Yeah, I don't want to overcomplicate it. I think, going into barrels, I usually don't try to cloud my mind with any sort of like, this is going to get this, in 12 months or 24 months. But as I'm tasting through barrels or as the market's trending or kind of that kind of thing is that's where I start pulling influence from. So I try not to go in with like any, like, this is going to be this too much. Sometimes I've had to in the past just because it had to be a little bit more planned. But now that we're over 200 barrels, it's kind of like, all right, we have a little bit of room to play with here. We don't have to have it 100% figured out today. We can figure this out tomorrow and kind of see what direction the beer takes. But we do have like probably 6 or 7 recipes right now of stout, very similar to each other, but focusing on different grains, specialty grains. So or even malt suppliers. We actually just recently did one with like an all breeze recipe that were like equivalents, if you will, to other malts that I would use. So just to kind of see like what that recipe kind of could do, but probably at the end of the day, probably won't notice a big difference. But still kind of cool. That's just kind of where we're at right now, is just like tinkering around with little things like that and seeing if there are things that make differences. But
what would some of those little other differences be?
So like there's one malt that I used it's a Weyermann product, German brewery actually. But I use a malt that they make called Carafa Special II. It's just very heavily chocolate, but it also makes the beer like inky jet black.
Right.
So we go pretty heavy with that. So like a similar product that Brees would have would be like, Black Prince or Midnight Wheat.
Right.
Where it's like a bitterless kind of black malt. But we'll kind of see like, do we get the same chocolate notes and stuff like that? But yeah. I don't know.
What have you? I mean, have you been tasting some
them?
Of those?
Yeah, they're hard. I'm not gonna lie, they're hard to really judge when they're super fresh. I think those big stouts really take a few months to kind of even not on cask, unless you're loading them up with like pastry stuff, kind of hides some of those malt flavors. But it does take a little while, and these beers are ones that we just brewed like within the last like 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But we liked them. We liked them out of stainless going into cask and stuff. But I wouldn't say I noticed anything necessarily crazy or eye-opening. But it was nice. It was pleasant. So
yeah,
I'm excited.
So what does your typical specialty malt makeup then look like? If base malt's not a big thing for you, how do you build those layers? I mean, that the power of this, especially when you're building stouts that have very high finishing gravities. Which is what the audience, what the people want right now. But building those kinds of layers of flavor, into a stout takes a lot of nuanced approach and even some subtle things that you wouldn't think are that necessary within a beer that's that big. How do you go about kind of building those layers of flavor?
So I mean, we really do take a pretty simple approach to most of the stouts. Like I don't think there's anything like crazy, maybe because I've been doing it long enough that I just don't think it's crazy. But I mean, we're building with any sort of base malt. Again, doesn't matter for me too much. And then on top of that, we really want the viscosity. Me and a buddy of mine kind of call this effect almost that we get when we drink these beers as like a waterbed type of effect, where it just kind of sloshes in your mouth, but it's not sweetness. I think there's a fine line between too much sweetness and viscosity. So With that said, we try to use some high protein grains, typically oats, but we've done rye or even wheat and stuff like that. But typically oats are what we'll fall on. That would be like our standard kind of recipe.
Flaked oats, malted oats.
We used to use only flaked oats, and we got burned plenty of times on the mash, getting stuck mashes and having to call it quits and opening up a mash tun and have it go everywhere. So finally learned my lesson enough times that we switched we still use some malted oats, but we also use some, we use some flaked oats, but we also use malted oats, which kind of help the runoff. They got husks and stuff in there. So makes it a lot easier.
What kind of percentage would oats, be?
And we're probably like 20%, I bet. Off the top of my head, I would say close to 20%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're talking, a full mash tun, 1,700 pounds, 20% starts to become a lot per barrel, which is actually something I'll talk about here in a minute. But I like to go pounds per barrel versus percentage. And then on top of that, then we're going with the Carafa that I spoke about. So that's going to get lots
Carafa II.
Carafa Special II. It's a dehusked Carafa. So it doesn't add a lot of bitterness or astringent character, which I think is important. And then,
but you find that it also has a textural and
it does, I think it actually does. It is barley, but it definitely adds a texture thing to it. And then on top of that, we're going, a couple different 2 to 3 crystal malts, nothing crazy. I don't usually even go too dark, anywhere from 15 up to like 90 Lovibond crystals. I like the actual flavor of like caramel malt. So I feel like once you get a little too dark, you start pulling more fruit character, and it's not. We do get a lot of fruit character in our beer, but it doesn't need any more. So I try to keep the crystal and the caramel malts kind of in check, and more in that like 50 Lovibond, 60 Lovibond, which to me tastes like caramel, which adds a nice backbone to the beer. And then on top of that, we're going with like black malt and then roasted barley. I don't do any chocolate malt or anything like that. Maybe occasionally I think we've done one, but I usually reserve chocolate malts for our porters, and then roasted barley for our stouts. It's kind of my distinction between our two brands. So that's my quick distinction between the two, the two styles. Trying to think. On top of that, we're going with. I think that was it. That covers it. Your caramel malts, and then 3 different dark malts between roasted black and the Carafa. And then oats. Really, it's simple. And then,
So you mentioned you try to think about it as pounds per barrel rather than percentages. Talk to me about that. Yeah,
that was something that actually years ago when I was getting into making stouts, and I realized that at home I was having just terrible efficiency issues compared to what on a professional brewing equipment, and what I realized was my efficiency differences would essentially, if I'm pulling 60%, but I'm still using the same percentage of malt, I'm actually now getting less of that typically I'll I'm trying to think of a good example here. If I have black malt that let's just say makes up 5%, I'm just spitballing a number. 5%, but my efficiency goes down. I'm going to be pulling off of that small 5% amount. So now my black malt actually just went down even less than 5%, if that makes sense. So I've always kind of based everything off of pounds per barrel or pounds per gallon, or however you want to, whatever scale you're looking at. And that way it makes it a little easier to scale up and down. And then I just adjust my efficiency and then adjust with my base malt to hit my target gravities. So I'm not going to, keep my black malt or whatever malts at a certain flavor threshold in the beer. I guess saturation point maybe.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of a good way to explain my thought process.
So that way you're not scaling in the same linear fashion across all of the malts.
Correct.
That some of those specialty malts
don't need to get scaled up.
They don't need to get scaled.
Right.
But the base malt does scale based on that kind of efficiency.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
So I've always taken that approach, even with hazies and stuff. You know, when I'm talking about oats for hazies, it's just kind of like scale it up, a pound per gallon, and then I equate that into a pound per barrel, and just make the adjustment real quick. And then if my efficiency goes up, then I just pull back on my Pilsner, but I keep the oats, the same. So depending on whatever recipe I'm I'm working with. But yeah, that's kind of
interesting. We're gonna have to think about that because we do lots of scaling for recipes, in the magazine.
Yeah,
and certainly scale linearly across all malts.
Yeah,
so we might have to kind of think about the way that we take that strategy as folks like you give us recipes. And we bring them down from a commercial scale into a 5-gallon batch. That keeping some of those ratios of specialty malts. Well, it makes a lot of sense.
I think part of it though could the efficiency changes usually aren't drastic, but when we're talking like, oats just tend to be a thing in pretty much every beer that we brew nowadays. At least at phase 3, there's way more beers that have oats. But oats just don't extract like barley. So we see huge efficiency swings and stuff on as soon as we're starting to add, 20% oats or 40% oats. All of a sudden now your efficiency just kind of goes haywire. So that's kind of where I use that more. But if you're talking like a Pilsner, you're probably going to be roughly the same efficiency on a homebrew scale as you would be on a larger scale.
Right.
Maybe.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about viscosity, which then I'll get us into the conversations about boiling and time and the way that you mash and all of those pieces. Before we do that, when it comes to brewing, nobody has your back like Clarion, because their food grade lubricants are formulated to help make your brewing system 100% food safe. That means when you switch to Clarion, you can put the costly potential of contamination and recall out of your mind. All you need to worry about is brewing great beer. And since you already do that, well, it's more like focusing on business as usual. Go to clarionlubricants.com to learn more. So texture and this kind of waterbed effect is a thing for you.
Absolutely.
How does that weigh into mash and boil process? Are you running multiple mashes for some of these barrel-aged stouts? Are you engaging in this extraordinarily long boil, 30-plus hour boil thing that folks like Derek at Moxa and Neil at Weldworks have been swearing by? What does that piece of it look like for you?
Well, so I've never done anything, 30 hours or anything like that. We've done in the past, I've done, 6-hour boils and stuff like that, 5-hour boils. Nothing really that I can remember longer than that. So if I need to make an adjustment on gravity, then we're not afraid to use like a DME or usually a DME is typically what we'll lean on. We've used liquid extract. But typically we'll honestly just go into a DME. And I think that provides a lot of the same character that you get from the longer boil. And we have done side-by-sides of double mashing versus single mashing with the adjustment of the DME. And I still stick to that. Like at first, actually, I forgot my rule of pounds per barrel. And we would do 2 mashes that were identical. And I realized, like, oh crap, like we're still only getting 15 barrels, but now we just used twice the amount of roasted barley in 2 mashes. So we quickly changed that and started doing half and half of the specialty malts, and we're able to just increase the base malt. I think we did that one time. I made a mistake on that, but we've done double mashes, we've done single mashes with DME as a adjustment. And quite frankly, I've never noticed a big difference on either of the two. Not saying that longer boils like don't work. I just think for us it makes sense, and usually we need the brew house pretty quick. We're we're doing 8 to 10 turns a week, and it's just kind of like more of a we need like to keep moving to keep things moving.
Your approach to thick with 2 C's does not have to have a 30-hour boil and triple mash, but you still accomplish that. And like you say, that is really that kind of high protein malt piece that does that. Is there a evaporation component in the barrels that also contributes to that?
Probably. I mean, yes, I would say 100% in the casks, but I also don't think I think we're able to achieve that even on like fresh stuff. But I really think that it comes back to, for us, is like the high percentage of like oats or rye or wheat, depending on the recipe. Usually oats. I think definitely have a bigger impact on the mouthfeel than the sweetness sometimes. Maybe not all the time. I'd say I'd say they're both as equally important for us.
What's your typical gravity goal, starting gravity for a beer that's going to go into barrels? And do you have, and also then like general IBU guidelines? What kind of bitterness are you looking for? Because over that many years, stuff's going to knock down and change.
Yep. So kind of a cool question. Your first question as far as gravity. We're looking usually between 35 and 38. 38 is sort of becoming. We're trying to move back down to 35. We were hitting like 37, 38 for probably a year at phase 3. But again, we're kind of anticipating this respect for not needing it to be an insanely sweet beer. So we're trying to again move that down just a little bit. So we've been between 35 and 37, I would say though, but with kind of an anticipation of keeping it on the lower end of that, which is still absolutely massive when you kind of rewind 5 years even. 30 Plato is huge. So So these beers are
your beers like perennial Maman or 30 Plato beer typically. You've got some brewers pushing 40 Plato.
Yep. I've seen the Instagram pictures.
I've seen those Instagram pictures too.
We haven't gotten there yet.
What are you doing?
I think we did a 38 Plato beer, or 38 and a half or something. I think we almost hit 39 once just to correct a batch that had lower efficiency right before it. So, but yeah, no expectation for me to really push much higher than that, at least now. Again, if the market talks, the market will talk. But I think it's safe to assume we're kind of in a no pun intended, a sweet spot. So we'll kind of stay there. But and then as far as IBUs, I don't look at IBUs too much, but for stuff going into casks, IBUs, in addition to the alcohol component of the beer, I'm using them more as a preservative, as more of like a safety thing. Like, hey, this is gonna be sitting for 2 years.
Sure.
What can we do to kind of help preserve it? So we'll usually go a little higher, and only like 45 to maybe 50 IBUs for if it's 100% that batch is going into casks. We'll tend to be on that 45 range. And then if it's something fresh, we'd go a little lower. We go just about 35, I would say. And that's really it. But as far as balance and stuff like that goes, we're only looking for the roasted aspects of the beer. I use those components
that produces the bitterness.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. So that's kind of my approach. It kind of always has been. But
how do you think about that? I mean, as you're looking at software, thinking about the bitter, contribution of some of these, dark, black malts, and what, you can't think about it just in IBU terms, but you are envisioning how all of those pieces of bitterness are going to work together.
Correct. So I think that goes into my expected final gravity, and knowing what the sweetness level is and how much balance there should need to be. But I think the bigger part here is probably just experience working with those malts and knowing like how much roast or bitterness or whatnot I'm going to get from X amount of black malt or X amount of Carafa. So I think a lot of it comes down to experience, but yeah, it's just worked. So we kind of do it.
What's fermentation look like on these gigantic 38 or 37 Plato beers? Now you're talking about a lot to ferment, and what's the method of getting through that?
Yeah, so I'd say for a good amount of time now, we've actually just switched over to a dry yeast. We use USO5, which is an American ale yeast. I preferred that just because the oxidation requirements are less. So it's a little bit more of a, I guess, just easier. You don't have to think about it as much. But also from a sanitary standpoint, knowing that I'm pushing a fresh pitch, I'm spraying the outside of a bag with alcohol, and able to, kind of keep things just super sterile. It's a generation 1. It's not harvested off of another tank that I'm relying on that tank to have been cleaned and sanitized, and might be an IPA or some sort, of something. But, and it's worked really well. We get, good attenuation with it, clean profile. So kind of keep it simple there. But yeah, we're typically 21 days on stainless. We're fermenting probably in a week, I would say, for the most part. Because again, they are big, and we're pushing sometimes like into the 14, maybe even low 15% ABV range. Sometimes lower, sometimes like 12.5 to 13. But there have been times where that yeast will get us up to like 14, which is even a little higher than 14. Yeah, 21 days. In the last, I'd say half of that time though, and there is more of a conditioning phase. We're just waiting for, we're slowly chilling it, and trying to let yeast fall out and whatnot. We do have a centrifuge, so we actually centrifuge now going into cask to remove yeast. You just don't want try to get as much yeast out of there, so it's not just sitting in there. Although I will say, I've had some beers that I can definitely tell were on yeast, and they autolyzed just a little bit, and sometimes it works. In a stout, it probably depends on the grain bill and stuff. Not something that I want to like really try to do, and I think it's a lot risky, of luck. I don't think there's like an exact method to doing it, but I've definitely tasted beers.
Do you get umami or do you get soy sauce?
Right.
One's good, one's not so
good.
Right.
Exactly. So, but with that said, we try to remove as much yeast as possible. So we'll run it through a centrifuge on the way into filling casks. And that's been new for us for about a year. I'd say we started doing that. Yeah. So
anything else you do for yeast health to pull them through there?
Not really. No.
Wow.
No, it's literally, we pitch probably pretty heavy. I'm trying to think of a quick ratio here, but it'd probably be something like 5,000 grams in a 15 barrel batch. That's that high. So pretty high, but it works. So
and they can go straight into this generally high sugar. I mean, that's a stressful environment for yeast, and then they are pushing there. You don't have to step it up or anything.
No, we don't even hydrate it or anything. We literally sprinkle it in. For doing 2 turns, we try to get it in between the first and second turn, so it kind of sloshes maybe a little bit, or kind of helps mix in a little bit. But yeah, typically we're just end of the day up on a ladder, dumping it in. That's it, and then it's usually ripping within 24 hours, I would say.
And then what do you so say you take that 35 Plato stout, what does it go into barrels at?
Depends. We've been playing around again with the final gravity, so no matter what, we want to start at that 35 to 38, but we can manipulate through mash temp and maybe even sugars. Like if we want to dry it out a little bit more, we can add some simple sugar to ferment out and get a little bit more alcohol. But I would say anywhere right now, we're probably, feels nuts, but I know it's not because I've talked to plenty of brewers that are doing it. But I would say we're anywhere between 15 and 18 for the most part, but not to say that we haven't gone lower or a little higher than that. But that's probably the range that we're usually looking
I thought you were going to give me a higher number, but because so that actually sounds kind of reasonable.
We've hit 20 on occasion.
20 was the number I had in my head.
But that's kind of, again, trying to wean away from that a little bit and get more a little bit more drinkable.
Sure.
But they do stand up to barrels quite well, especially when you're talking 24 months and you're pulling a lot of tannin. A lot of stuff's happening in that barrel for 24 months. We're not temperature controlled. It has heat during the winter, but if you've ever been to Chicago or anywhere in the Midwest, big temperature swings between each season, and I think we kind of enjoy that and play off of that a little bit, and especially even humidity changes too, which I think probably has a little bit bigger impact than even just the temperature. Just drying out the wood a lot holds up. The higher Plato stuff definitely holds up to those like two years of aging. Better than I think like a lower gravity would.
And that's your goal for aging now, to try to hit around 2 years?
I think right now I'm probably closer to 18 to 20 months would be my ideal spot. I think 2 years starts to get a little bit rich, which is nice occasionally. I don't mind a beer that has that much time on it, but 24 plus months
maybe a
starts
good blending component, but not something you want to drive an entire beer with.
Probably, although 1 and 2, one of the ones that was just scored, that was it was a blend of 2 casks that were both on the same rack. 1 and 2, our first and second barrel, for 26 months.
Wow.
And that held up on its own. Again, it worked, but it's not something I'm typically going to try to do on its own all the time. That was more of a specialty kind of thing.
And that's one that'll just be sold in the tap room, right?
Correct. Yeah. That was a tap room on premise only. You got one of the few bottles that ever left the building. But typically I would say 18 months is kind of my sweet spot. in the past, I would probably have said 15 months, but with these bigger beers, as they've gotten bigger, I think we've had to add a little bit more time to get the balance correct. So I think right now 18 to 20 months would be like my good blend, whether I'm taking barrels that are 24 or 12 months and I'm averaging 18 or whatever. So that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, let's talk about choosing and selecting barrels. That process, and how you go, and age of bourbon, different spirits that you choose, all make an impact there. How do you what's that process look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I wish
you got competition in there in that Chicago area for barrels.
We do, yeah. I haven't ever really been a big proponent of overthinking the barrels, and I think a lot of it goes into marketing. I think a lot of it lands on just like marketing the barrels as this is this barrel or this is that barrel. Not saying that some of them are
leveraging
good.
The hype of that bourbon that might have been in it before.
Yes. But I will say that I've had some barrels that do live up to that hype.
Yeah.
But more often than not, man, I'm surprised by the ones that I'm just like, really, like this random Buffalo Trace barrel that came on in a load of trucks with a load of barrels with 20 other casks that we just ordered, and this these 3 taste really, really good. Like so try not to buy into too much of that, but there is something there, I will say. But yeah, I'm not really selecting as far as like going out into field and doing any of that. I wish I could do that. Just haven't established any relationships really with any distilleries where I could. I guess there's one that I've worked with, CH Distillery, who was using some MGP stuff. So kind of selecting through them with them, which have turned out really good. Yeah, and then as far as like age goes, I don't mind working with the younger like barrels. I think that there's a lot of life left in them. But using that as an ingredient, knowing that we're going to get a lot of wood back from those barrels, is something that we kind of make sure that we go into. So anywhere from the 4-year barrel on the minimum, but I would probably say an 8 to 10 year is kind of like a mark that we probably find most satisfying when we're pulling a nail, and it's out of a cask that's around that age length, is usually ones that kind of make us go like, wow, like this turned out great. So I think it probably makes sense. It's kind of in that middle range, so you're not getting too much barrel, but it's just more balanced, I think, maybe. We've used barrels. I had a Heaven Hill 23-year-old barrel that we used as part of our blend in our barley wine that we just released a few months back, and that one was good. But I think it worked well in that style of beer too. The wood that was left wasn't necessarily bourbony. It was a lot of tannin. And I think that worked with having like a sweet kind of barley wine that doesn't have the roast to provide some of that like tannin or bitterness, if you will. So it worked really well in that aspect as a blending component.
As you're tasting through barrels and trying to, what does that schedule look like for you? How often are you evaluating these things, and do you, and how does that strategy then kind of move out from there?
Yeah, so we're not tasting as often as we probably should be. I would like to try our casks. Probably, go through specific casks every month and have rotation of maybe trying 20 at a time between like 2 days or something. Haven't really gotten into that schedule, but we should. That's a lot of It is, yeah. But it is important. But I think right now, basically, I'm just using a spreadsheet, and I'm kind of getting an idea of when barrels are coming up to like that sweet spot of 18, or I'm trying to find a blend of, okay, well, I have these two casks that are 24 months, and then I got this cask that's this, and then I have a bunch that are kind of right in the middle. That might sound like a good blend. Let's go try that. Let's go see kind of how that works. But when we're doing adjuncts, it's really hard to put too much stock into what the barrel is kind of providing at that point,
because you're going to mess it all up again.
Exactly. I mean, it's sad, but it is the truth.
Yeah.
I know I
say that jokingly. You're adding more layers of flavor.
We are,
but it will certainly cover up some of the nuance of those things. Yeah.
So when we're doing blends, I would say for adjuncted stuff, we can go into it with more. I'm looking at a spreadsheet and I'm saying, okay, this should work. Let's make sure. Let's try it and make sure we liked the blend. But 9 times out of 10, there's no changes once we try that. Sometimes it might be a little hotter than we like. That's typically what we found in the past, is that we go to try them and that there's just an excessive amount of like whiskey heat.
Yeah.
So we'll go back and look and see what barrel that maybe we can swap 2 of those barrels out with 2 barrels that were a little thicker, and we'll try that and see if it works better. But for the most part, like I said, 9 out of 10 times we're trying a cask blend based off of looking at a spreadsheet.
Sure.
It's not romantic, but it's the truth. But when we're talking about like a beer like Minushi or something that might have less adjunct, like this Unoya here on the table with Ugandan vanilla, where there's a single component that isn't going to hide, and we really need that component to like work with whatever other flavors, a little bit more thought is going to go into that, especially with Minushi, which is a non-adjunct stout, so all barrel, all stout, that we're going to make sure works, on its own, can stand on its own. The blend tastes as good as we can possibly make it. So those are different, but yeah, the heavily adjuncted one, the ones that have more pastry type flavors usually tend to work out just fine. Kind of how they are.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. How do you make some of those ingredient calls? Then you've got this beer barrel, in barrels, you pull it out. Different brewers work different ways. Some folks are led by the flavors of the beer. Other folks are, you mentioned it before. Sometimes it's driven by, ideas that you see other folks do or, using, and you want to try and experiment and play with that too. Or you see flavors that just, pop out in life and, think, oh, we should kind of explore that with a beer. What's that creative process around ingredients, adjuncting look like for you?
It really changes a lot, honestly. We're not doing too many releases a year as far as like adjuncted anything a year or stouts, barrel aged stouts. I would say we're doing 4. So I mean, we have like 3 months in between.
Yeah.
And 3 months doesn't sound like a long time, but 3 months in the market, all of a sudden now there's some new hot flavor, whether it's banana in a stout or or some sort of new cookie that just came out that everyone's but. I try to listen to the market as best I can. But we try to also use ingredients that we're comfortable with. I try not to get too fancy with it. Like if I know something works, we're gonna kind of go down that road instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. And coffee works well in a stout. Cocoa nibs work good in a stout. I love working with coconut. That's probably my favorite adjunct to use. Yeah, not trying to reinvent the wheel and just kind of. I don't necessarily, again, I'm not like tasting the barrel and going, like this has like a note of this that I think might play off of that. It just never tends to work out that way.
Yeah.
And
it's a much more romantic story if you tell
really
it that way, Shaun.
It really is. I will say, so we have done that. And again, going back to the Unoya 5 that's here on the table, that was conceptualized pretty early on. We had a pretty good idea that was going to end up getting married with vanilla. I didn't know what vanilla at that specific time when it was brewed. That one is a rye imperial stout aged in rye whiskey cask. So we already had a play of like we want to do rye on rye, and then knowing that's going to play well with vanilla.
That does really well in Chicago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was more thought out and kind of brewed, from brew day through cask selection through adjunct selection. Kind of thought out a little bit more carefully.
Yeah.
And so we do some of that. It's just, again, I'm not, I can't tell a romantic story. It's just not usually that doesn't work out that way, but yeah.
There's that Midwestern nose to the grindstone work ethic where I don't need to, get overly flowery about our story around that. Let's talk a little bit about how you use adjuncts. You mentioned that you love coconut as an ingredient. Mm-hmm. How do you go about using that coconut in terms of volume, in terms of preparation, in terms of maximizing flavor extraction and aroma in barrel-aged beers?
So with coconut, traditionally I had always liked a blend of toasted with raw. And I would kind of toast it to a point where what I was toasting was thick enough that the top would be, a darker brown, and then kind of in the middle it was pretty much untoasted, and then the bottom might be a little bit toasted. And that started back at at RAM phase 1. Toasting stuff in a pan and throwing it in a corny keg and injecting that into a full keg.
At least they had a kitchen there where you could do that.
They did, yeah. That was a huge thing that they had that, and I took advantage of that, and that's kind of how I taught myself how to use coconut when I was at homebrew level on my stove.
Yeah.
So similar approach there, but then through the years, obviously scaling up, making bigger batches, that kind of changed. So it went from pan toasting, which I actually really liked a lot, into throwing it in the oven and kind of toasting it that way on big sheets. And that's where I did that for a while. And then we actually found a good ratio of toasted coconut. So we actually are buying pre-toasted coconut.
Yeah.
And then coconut flakes that we buy that are super oily, really, really good actually. I like them a lot, and the raw coconut aspect I think provides a lot of the nose in the actual coconut flavor, but the toasted coconut aspect brings on more of a buttery kind of quality, pastry quality, I suppose.
Right.
But almost enhances. But we use a smaller ratio of toasted versus raw on flaked coconut. But yeah, so we're using anywhere between probably 400 and 500 pounds at a time when we're using coconut. So we actually had to have a infusion vessel made.
Yeah.
So a couple of my friends, Derek at Moxa and Wes and Brandon over at Bottlelogic have a same infusion vessel that I had. I saw it there and I was like, this is awesome. And actually saw it at Bottlelogic and basically heard their testimonials, and we were like, all right, we got on the phone with the manufacturer, and we kind of changed a couple little things and told them the size that we needed.
Yeah.
And it's been working great, but basically it just recircs. It's like a small mash tun, 10 barrel mash tun basically on wheels that we can roll around. It has a grate in there with multiple draw points and some whirlpool type ports on the side, so we're able to kind of move that and it just spins, and that's been great. But we use that for pretty much everything now, with whether it's injecting fruit into a beer, whether it's adjuncting with coconut or cocoa nibs or coffee or whatever, it all kind of is able to just go in that, which is awesome.
Sure.
Yeah, that's kind of that. But what we'll typically do is, we'll take the clean beer, so either centrifuged or freshly out of cask or whatever, and then we'll load up the infusion vessel. And then depending on what it is, usually we're looking at like a 3 to 5 day sort of steep time. Yeah. But we try to make a concentrate. So we don't put all the beer in there. We'll make a concentrate. We'll inject that back into the bright tank where the rest of the beer is sitting, taste it, and then kind of bounce it back and forth as many times or until we stop getting extract.
With your infusion tank, you're not just circulating out of your primary tank back, constantly. You're
just kind of making just
bringing it in
5 barrel concentrate. Yeah, exactly. And like I said, we'll bounce back and forth until flavor's good, or until we're like, we're not getting any more out of this. Like, time to redose coconut or redose whatever the adjunct is, until we do get the flavor in the main beer kind of where we want it. But I've been a big proponent of higher amount of adjunct in less time. I feel like it's a little bit more explosive flavor. And you almost pull like what's on the surface, and sometimes the stuff underneath the surface is a little astringent, especially with coconut. As you let it steep, you pull some like bitterness and astringent kind of flavors.
It's kind of like coconut. Coffee in the same way, like that. Rather than grinding it, just go whole bean and use more of it and take it off quick.
Exactly. Yeah, we've actually been doing whole bean. I had been mainly ground coffee for years, but then we recently decided to start doing whole bean. It's been great. But same thing, like you have to increase the dosage, and for the contact time it's about the same as we were doing for ground coffee. We just have to use a lot more of it, right. But we like the flavor profile a little bit better.
Any other adjuncts that you love using?
Well, cocoa nibs have treated me very well over the last several years. Actually had a GABF medal for a chocolate stout, which was the stout that I was saying earlier, the Cocoa Chaos. So that one, or cocoa nibs definitely are something that feel very in my wheelhouse and I feel comfortable using. We use Ghana cocoa nibs. They just provide a beautiful like milk chocolate type of flavor. Yeah. And again, kind of going back to the larger quantity, I think gives that like explosive chocolate nose that people just absolutely love. And again, with the sweetness, it really comes across as like milk chocolate.
Sure.
So, and it's oily, so it's like adds that viscosity. Yeah.
Anything special to the time and temperature?
No, we've played a lot with that. For the most part, I would say I prefer room temp for almost everything except for coffee. We do room temperature for pretty much everything. I just think it extracts well. Coffee, I think when it's a little warmer, you get a little bit more roasty bitterness off of it. So we try to do that on a little cooler. But that infusion vessel is pretty hard to move around. Our cooler is not right next to our cellar, so moving it back and forth is a little hard. It's not glycol jacketed, so kind of just have to do it that way. But I actually prefer it that way anyway. So.
Is there an ingredient that you're excited to work with in the near term?
Yeah. So we did a beer with Other Half. We brewed a stout. They actually just released theirs last weekend. Our timeline didn't quite line up, but with wild Thai banana. So I've used banana in a stout.
They've taken you down the banana train.
I know.
Oh gosh.
Well, Sam was like,
they've corrupted another one.
Sam goes, yeah, you want to do a Oreo banana stout? And I'm like, sure, like why not? So I was like, but I'm not gonna lie, I was like, I'm not very familiar with banana. I've used it once, and I quite frankly I didn't like it a lot. But I don't think it was right. It was the banana. It's just I didn't use maybe the right banana and stuff. So, but yeah, we got some wild Thai banana that we'll be using. So I'm excited to use that for the first time. That should be fun. Cool.
Yeah. As we zoom out, what's the big picture look like for phase 3? What's the goal? What's success look like? What are you all hoping to achieve? And when will you know that you've achieved it?
We don't have huge plans as far as like from a growth aspect. I think we're very comfortable where we're at right now. Obviously, we're going to need to grow over the next several years, and just to kind of be able to offer to our employees like what we want to offer them, and because obviously cost of living goes up, so we need to sell more beer. I mean, we could raise the prices on the beer, but that's harder. We're already kind of on the higher end, I would say, of most of our beers. So that really isn't an option. So eventually we'll have to make a little bit more beer. But right now we're pretty much running full steam. Typically we're running out of fermenters and stuff. That's been a challenge, is just trying to dictate or work with the schedule and that. But yeah, not really trying to move too much more beer. But we're, just trying to really get things dialed in and have a consistency. Right now, this 2021, it was kind of the year of that. Is we're building out a lab right now. Currently, it should be actually done in about a week or two. Got some pretty cool equipment, alkalizer and PCR and all the plating stuff that we need. So full on lab, and just to be able to do all that in house and be in touch with that aspect of our brewery. We're also distributing pretty heavily in state. We self-distribute. So just doing our part, making sure that beer that we're putting out on shelves is stable and good, and that kind of thing. So I think that's probably the immediate plans, is just kind of settling in where we've gotten. We went through an absolute insane, growth phase. We went from brewing maybe 1,500 barrels a year on pacing 1,500 barrels a year for our first 9 months. And then that jumped up to 3,500 barrels, and then purchased all the equipment. And then, now we're right around 6,000. So it's just like, we haven't ever had time to kind of reflect and kind of put everything in place that we wanted to. So I think we started realizing that, and like just saying like, okay, like we need to make sure before we like keep running, like we need to like take a look at what's around us and make sure we're like setting ourselves up correctly here. But that goes with like expansion as far as like just having the footprint to like have certain things. Lab obviously takes up a good amount of that. Having a nicer conference room so everyone in the manager team kind of can get together and we can all be on the same page. Communication is something that we are like very, very high on. We make sure that's something that is always done. We do weekly meetings, and there's multiple things going on and stuff, just making sure everyone's on the same page. But yeah, nothing crazy in the plans. Like you said, we started Lowell's seltzer, so that's something that we've been exploring, and we anticipate working very well for us, and kind of making sure that we're approaching that and kind of following through with that throughout next year, and keeping our ear to the ground and watching trends and trying to be a little bit different with how we present it. I
love that it's a brewery most hyped and known for barrel-aged stouts. Mm-hmm. where you've started a hard seltzer, smoothie hard seltzer brand on the side. But one of the things you're also excited about is being able to brew more lagers and classic styles and pub-inspired beers, for that kind of crowd also, just to kind of keep it interesting for you too.
It keeps it interesting, and again, it keeps us in check, man. Like, get down these rabbit holes and you start reading reviews on some big old stout that has marshmallow or this or that in it, and kind of, you got to remember, like, where did this all start? It started with like an amber ale or something, like 7 or 8 years ago or whatever. So just kind of keeping that in our minds. But we have dedicated a lot of focus on the lager program. We have a couple 30 barrel lagering tanks, and then on top of that we do a beer P3 Pills, which has been very popular over the last year and a half for us. But it's just an American lager. It's just that beer that when we just want a beer. Kind of beer. Don't have to think about it. Always making sure we have something classic going has been pretty important to us, whether it's a West Coast IPA or a Belgian wit beer that we did. Just always making sure we're doing stuff like that. We don't get too lost in the haze and the stouts.
I think that's a great place to bring this to a close. G&D chillers will hit 28 degrees without breaking a sweat. Sativa is perfect for hazy IPA and other hop-forward beers. Old Orchard prides themselves on consistent product and reliable supply. ProBrew has the equipment, systems, and technology to take your brewery production to the next level and make your system 100% food safe with Clarion lubricants. Of course, if you'd like to support this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com. Click on the subscribe button. If you're a Pro brewer, we have All Access Pro subscriptions that'll get you the first digital access to great content from folks like Ben Keane and Kate Bernat and Stan Hieronymus and others, as well as print copies of the magazine, video, all that other fun stuff. Check that out at beerandbrewing.com. Shaun, if people want to learn more about Phase 3, where do they find you?
Phase 3 Brew is all on all the socials, and then our website, phase3brewing.com.
Thanks for talking to me on the podcast.
Yeah,
Cheers.
Absolutely. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.